Sarah Martinez looked like any other 28-year-old office worker walking into the downtown coffee shop that Tuesday morning. Her floral dress, gentle smile, and the way she carefully counted exact change suggested someone who lived a quiet, predictable life. The other customers barely noticed her as she ordered her usual vanilla latte and found a corner table by the window. What they didn't know was that in exactly 7 minutes, the seemingly ordinary woman would single-handedly neutralize 8 armed criminals who were about to turn their peaceful morning into a nightmare. What they couldn't have imagined was that the soft-spoken woman sipping coffee had spent the last decade perfecting skills that would make Navy SEALs envious. Sometimes the most extraordinary people hide in the most ordinary places. Sometimes a hero doesn't look like what movies have taught us to expect. And sometimes, when chaos erupts and trained professionals are nowhere to be found, salvation comes from the person you'd least suspect. This is the story of 12 minutes that changed everything. 12 minutes when a secret that had been carefully guarded for years finally came to light. 12 minutes that proved appearances can be devastatingly deceiving. You think you know what a hero looks like. You're about to discover how wrong you can be. Sarah Elena Martinez had perfected the art of being invisible. At 28 years old, she had spent the better part of a decade blending seamlessly into the fabric of suburban American life. Her colleagues at Morrison & Associates accounting firm knew her as the quiet woman who always brought homemade cookies to office parties and never missed a deadline. Her neighbors in the tidy subdivision of Maple Grove thought she was a sweet single woman who kept her lawn perfectly manicured and always waved cheerfully from her front porch. None of them knew about the soundproofed basement beneath her modest 2-story house. None of them had seen the arsenal of precision rifles, handguns, and tactical equipment that lined the walls of her underground sanctuary. They had no idea that every morning before her vanilla latte and every evening after her 9-to-5 routine, Sarah transformed into someone entirely different. The transformation had begun 12 years earlier when Sarah was just 16. Her father, Miguel Martinez, had been a decorated Army Ranger whose tours in Afghanistan had left him with more nightmares than medals. When he returned to civilian life, he channeled his restless energy into teaching his daughter skills that most fathers would never dream of passing on. While other teenage girls were learning to drive or experimenting with makeup, Sarah was learning to calculate wind speed and bullet drop at distances that would challenge professional snipers. Miguel had lost his wife, Sarah's mother, to a random act of violence when Sarah was 14. Maria Martinez had been killed during a convenience store robbery, shot down while buying milk and bread for the family dinner. The senselessness of her death had shattered something fundamental in Miguel's worldview. He became obsessed with the idea that evil could strike anywhere, anytime, and that the only protection was preparation. Every weekend for 2 years, Miguel drove Sarah to remote locations where he taught her to shoot with a precision that bordered on supernatural. He started with basic marksmanship, but quickly realized his daughter possessed something extraordinary. Her natural hand-eye coordination, combined with an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure, made her a prodigy with firearms. Where other shooters might struggle to hit targets at 200 yards, Sarah was consistently placing shots within a 2-inch circle at 4 times that distance. The training intensified after Miguel received a terminal cancer diagnosis during Sarah's senior year of high school. Knowing his time was limited, he compressed years of advanced tactical training into months of grueling preparation. Sarah learned combat movement, tactical breathing, stress shooting, and, most importantly, how to make split-second decisions under life-or-death pressure. Miguel brought in former military contacts who taught her skills that weren't found in any civilian shooting manual. When Miguel passed away just 3 weeks after Sarah's high school graduation, he left behind a daughter who possessed capabilities that very few people in the world could match. But he also left behind explicit instructions. These skills were only to be used in the most extreme circumstances, when innocent lives hung in the balance and no other options existed. Sarah honored her father's wishes by burying this part of herself deep. She enrolled in college, earned a degree in accounting, and built the kind of quiet, unremarkable life that would never draw attention. She dated occasionally but never seriously, knowing that the secret she carried would be impossible to share with someone who hadn't lived through what she had experienced. Most of her relationships ended amicably when men decided she was too independent or emotionally unavailable, never realizing they were dating someone who could outshoot most special forces operatives. The basement training facility became her sanctuary and her burden. Every morning at 5:30, before the rest of the neighborhood stirred, Sarah descended into her underground world. She maintained her skills with a religious dedication, knowing that abilities like hers would deteriorate rapidly without constant practice. Her morning routine included an hour of marksmanship training using a sophisticated laser simulation system, followed by physical conditioning that would challenge professional athletes. She had constructed the basement facility over the course of 3 years, learning construction skills through online tutorials and hiring different contractors for small portions of the work so no single person understood the full scope of what she was building. The result was a state-of-the-art training facility that included climate control, advanced ventilation systems, and technology that allowed her to simulate shooting scenarios from around the world. The walls were lined with weapons that she had acquired through completely legal channels, though her collection would have impressed military armories. Each weapon was maintained with obsessive care, cleaned and calibrated regularly to ensure peak performance. Sarah had become an expert in ballistics, studying the characteristics of different ammunition types and understanding how environmental factors affected bullet trajectory with a precision that bordered on scientific. Her neighbors occasionally heard what they thought were construction noises coming from her basement, but Sarah had carefully scheduled her training sessions to coincide with times when power tools and renovation work would seem normal. The soundproofing was so effective that even her closest neighbors had never suspected that their quiet accountant neighbor was engaging in activities that would astound professional marksmen. The psychological toll of maintaining this double life was something Sarah had never fully acknowledged, even to herself. She often felt like she was living as two completely different people who happened to share the same body. There was Sarah the accountant, who worried about quarterly reports and office politics, and Sarah the warrior, who could calculate killing shots with mathematical precision. The constant switching between these identities required a mental discipline that exhausted her in ways that physical training never could. Her social life suffered under the weight of this secret. She attended office gatherings and neighborhood barbecues with a smile that felt increasingly forced as the years passed. Conversations about weekend plans and vacation destinations felt trivial when she spent her free time preparing for scenarios that other people couldn't imagine. She sometimes caught herself analyzing exit routes and potential defensive positions during casual social gatherings, a habit that made her feel isolated even when surrounded by friendly colleagues. The loneliness was perhaps the highest price she paid for honoring her father's memory. There were nights when she sat in her basement, surrounded by weapons that represented thousands of hours of dedicated training, and wondered if she was wasting her life preparing for events that might never come. She had become extraordinarily skilled at something she hoped she would never have to use, creating a peculiar form of expertise that brought no recognition or satisfaction. But Miguel's voice echoed in her memory during these moments of doubt. He had made her promise that if the moment ever came when innocent people needed protection and she was the only one capable of providing it, she would not hesitate. That promise had shaped every day of her adult life, turning her into a guardian that nobody knew existed. Sarah's dedication to maintaining her skills had actually improved over the years as technology advanced. She invested significant portions of her accounting salary in training equipment that allowed her to practice scenarios that traditional shooting ranges couldn't accommodate. Virtual reality systems let her experience combat situations without actually engaging in combat, while advanced ballistics software helped her understand how her skills would translate to real-world situations. The irony was not lost on her that she had become perhaps one of the most capable defensive shooters in the country while living a life that seemed to represent everything peaceful and ordinary about suburban America. Her ability to switch between these two realities had become so seamless that sometimes she almost forgot which version of herself was the real one. As Sarah finished her morning training session on what would become the most important day of her life, she had no idea that 12 years of preparation were about to be put to the ultimate test. She cleaned her practice weapons with the same meticulous care she brought to every aspect of her training, stored them securely, and headed upstairs to begin another day as Sarah Martinez, accountant. She selected a floral dress from her closet, applied minimal makeup, and checked the weather before deciding to walk to her favorite coffee shop instead of driving. It was a beautiful Tuesday morning in early autumn, and Sarah felt like the 10-minute walk would help her transition from her underground world back into the peaceful rhythm of normal life. What she could not have known was that 8 dangerous men had spent weeks planning to transform her quiet morning coffee run into something that would test every skill her father had taught her and force her to make decisions that would change her life forever. Tuesday, October 15th began like any other day for the regular customers of Brewster's Coffee House on Elm Street. The morning rush had settled into its comfortable rhythm by 8:15, with the usual mix of office workers grabbing quick caffeine fixes, retired couples enjoying leisurely breakfasts, and college students camping out with laptops and textbooks. The atmosphere was warm and familiar, filled with the comforting sounds of espresso machines, gentle conversation, and the soft jazz music that owner Tom Brewster played to create the perfect ambience. Sarah entered through the heavy glass door at exactly 8:22, just as she did every Tuesday and Thursday morning. The barista, Jessica, had her vanilla latte ready before Sarah even reached the counter, a small gesture of familiarity that made Sarah smile genuinely for the first time that morning. She paid with exact change, as always, and selected her usual table by the large front window where she could watch the tree-lined street while reviewing client files before heading to the office. The coffee shop held about 35 people that morning, a typical crowd for a weekday. There was Margaret Chen, the 73-year-old retired teacher who came in every day at 8 o'clock sharp and always ordered the same cinnamon scone with black coffee. Near the back sat David Rodriguez, a freelance graphic designer who had been working on his laptop in the same corner booth for 3 hours, surrounded by empty coffee cups and crumpled napkins covered in sketches. At the counter, Emily Thompson was ordering a complicated drink while juggling her 2-year-old son, Marcus, who was more interested in the colorful pastries behind the glass case than sitting still. Emily had started coming to Brewster's every Tuesday after her divorce, finding comfort in the routine and the way the staff always smiled at Marcus and sometimes snuck him an extra cookie. The sense of normalcy was so complete that nobody noticed the black SUV that had been parked across the street for the past 20 minutes. Nobody paid attention to the fact that its windows were tinted darker than legal regulations typically allowed, or that 3 more identical vehicles had positioned themselves at strategic points around the 2-block radius surrounding the coffee shop. The plan had been developed over 6 weeks by a group of men who specialized in creating chaos for profit. Their leader, Vincent Kozlov, had spent 15 years perfecting crimes that generated maximum impact with minimal risk to himself. His specialty was coordinated robberies that targeted multiple locations simultaneously, creating confusion that made law enforcement response less effective while maximizing the potential financial gain. Brewster's Coffee House had been selected not because it contained anything particularly valuable, but because it sat at the center of a carefully chosen target zone. Within a 3-block radius were a bank branch, a jewelry store, a check-cashing business, and a small medical clinic that processed significant amounts of cash from patients who avoided traditional insurance. The coffee shop would serve as the central command point for an operation designed to hit all 5 locations within a 12-minute window. Kozlov's team consisted of 8 carefully chosen men who had worked together on similar operations in 3 different states over the past 2 years. Each man brought specific skills. Marcus Webb handled electronic surveillance and communications, Antonio Silva specialized in crowd control and intimidation, Raymond Park was their expert in rapid entry and exit strategies, and the others filled roles that ranged from lookout duties to physical enforcement when intimidation proved insufficient. Their research had been exhaustive. They knew the coffee shop's layout, had observed the morning routine for 2 weeks, and had identified the probable locations of security cameras and potential exit routes. They understood the response times of local law enforcement and had planned their operation to conclude before police could effectively organize a coordinated response. What they had not researched, and could not have known, was that Sarah Martinez represented a variable that existed completely outside their experience and planning. Their surveillance had identified her as a regular customer who posed no threat, a quiet woman who minded her own business and never attracted attention. In all their years of criminal activity, they had never encountered someone whose ordinary appearance concealed capabilities that could disrupt their entire operation. At 8:28, Sarah was reviewing quarterly tax projections for a client when her peripheral vision caught something that made her subconsciously pause. Years of training had developed her situational awareness to a level that operated below conscious thought, and something about the street scene outside the window had triggered an almost automatic alert response. She looked up from her papers and observed what appeared to be a perfectly normal Tuesday morning. Cars moved at their usual pace, pedestrians walked their familiar routes, and nothing seemed obviously out of place. But her father's training had taught her to trust instincts that couldn't always be explained rationally, and something felt wrong in ways she couldn't immediately identify. Sarah began conducting what Miguel had called a soft surveillance sweep, a technique that appeared like casual observation but systematically evaluated potential threats. She noted the positions of other customers, identified possible cover locations within the coffee shop, and observed the street activity with an attention to detail that would have impressed intelligence professionals. At 8:31, the black SUV's doors opened simultaneously, and 8 men emerged with a coordination that immediately confirmed Sarah's instincts. They moved with military precision, each taking assigned positions that indicated extensive planning and professional execution. These were not random criminals acting on impulse. This was a coordinated operation conducted by people who understood tactics and timing. Vincent Kozlov entered through the front door first, his appearance designed to seem non-threatening until the moment he chose to reveal his true intentions. He was followed by 3 other men who spread out across the main floor of the coffee shop with movements that seemed casual but actually positioned them to control key areas of the space. The transformation from normal morning to hostage situation happened with terrifying speed. Kozlov produced a handgun and fired a single shot into the ceiling, the sound exploding through the peaceful atmosphere like a physical blow. The reaction was immediate and predictable. People screamed, dropped to the floor, and looked around desperately for escape routes that had suddenly been blocked by armed men. Sarah's response differed dramatically from everyone else in the coffee shop. While others reacted with panic and confusion, she felt a familiar calm descend over her consciousness. Years of training had prepared her for exactly this moment, and her mind automatically shifted into the tactical mode that her father had drilled into her until it became second nature. From her position by the window, Sarah quickly assessed the situation with a clarity that would have amazed the panicked customers around her. She counted 8 hostiles, identified their weapons as military-grade assault rifles and handguns, and noted their positions relative to the civilians who had suddenly become potential casualties in whatever operation these men had planned. Margaret Chen, the elderly retired teacher, had fallen when the first shot was fired and was struggling to get back to her feet. David Rodriguez had instinctively tried to shield his laptop, as if protecting his work could somehow matter in this new reality. Emily Thompson was clutching her 2-year-old son, her face showing the kind of terror that only a parent can experience when their child is threatened. Kozlov began speaking in the commanding tone that had served him well in previous operations, explaining that this was a robbery, that cooperation would ensure everyone's safety, and that any attempt to interfere would result in consequences that nobody wanted to experience. His words were chosen to maximize compliance while minimizing resistance, a script he had refined through years of criminal experience. But, as Kozlov delivered his threatening monologue, Sarah was conducting rapid calculations that had nothing to do with quarterly tax projections. She was estimating ranges, evaluating angles, and determining whether the skills she had spent 12 years developing could be deployed in an environment filled with innocent people who would be caught in any crossfire that developed. The decision she faced in that moment represented everything her father had tried to prepare her for, a situation where her unique capabilities might be the only thing standing between innocent people and catastrophic violence, but where using those capabilities would forever change her carefully constructed life. As Sarah sat perfectly still in her floral dress, appearing to be just another terrified customer, her mind was actually running through tactical scenarios with the speed and precision of a military computer. She was about to discover whether 12 years of secret preparation would prove sufficient for 12 minutes that would test every skill she possessed. The morning coffee run that had begun as a peaceful routine was about to become something that would be remembered for the rest of her life, and the lives of everyone else who happened to be present when ordinary Tuesday morning transformed into extraordinary circumstances that would demand extraordinary responses. The first 3 minutes of the hostage situation unfolded exactly as Vincent Kozlov had planned during countless rehearsals. His men had established complete control over the coffee shop's interior, positioning themselves to monitor all exits while maintaining clear lines of sight to the 35 terrified customers who now found themselves trapped in what had been their peaceful morning refuge. Sarah remained motionless at her window table, her body language suggesting the same fear and compliance that radiated from everyone else in the shop. But, beneath this carefully maintained exterior, her mind was operating in a state of hyper-awareness that transformed the chaotic scene into a series of tactical problems with potential solutions. Her father's training had taught her to prioritize information gathering before action, so she spent these crucial opening minutes conducting a detailed assessment that would inform any decisions she might make. She identified that 3 of the 8 men carried military-grade assault rifles while the others were armed with handguns. Their positioning indicated professional training, but she also noted small inefficiencies in their formation that suggested they were not current military personnel. The most dangerous individual was clearly Kozlov himself, who maintained a position near the center of the shop that allowed him to observe and control the entire space. His demeanor suggested extensive experience in situations like this, and the way he moved indicated someone who was comfortable with violence and prepared to use it if his authority was challenged. From her position by the window, Sarah could see that the operation extended beyond the coffee shop itself. The black SUV remained positioned across the street, and she caught glimpses of coordinated activity at other locations in the surrounding blocks. This was not a simple robbery, it was a complex operation that had turned Brewster's Coffee House into the command center for criminal activity that probably involved multiple targets. The realization that this was a larger operation changed Sarah's tactical calculations significantly. If she acted against the men in the coffee shop, she would likely disrupt their ability to coordinate with teams at other locations, potentially saving lives beyond those immediately visible to her. But it also meant that any action she took would have consequences that extended far beyond the walls of the coffee shop. Margaret Chan, the elderly retired teacher, had managed to regain her footing but was visibly shaken and struggling to understand what was happening around her. Her confusion and obvious vulnerability made her a particular concern for Sarah, who recognized that older hostages were often the first to suffer when situations deteriorated. David Rodriguez, the graphic designer, had abandoned any pretense of protecting his laptop and was now focused entirely on trying to make himself invisible to the armed men who controlled his fate. His position near the back of the shop placed him close to one of the gunmen, creating a potential problem if Sarah needed to neutralize that particular threat. Emily Thompson had managed to calm her 2-year-old son, Marcus, but Sarah could see the tremendous strain in the young mother's face. Emily was clearly fighting to maintain composure for her child's sake while internally processing the terrifying reality that both their lives now depended on the intentions and decisions of dangerous strangers. At minute 4 of the crisis, Kozlov received a radio transmission that caused his demeanor to shift in ways that Sarah recognized as significant. His body language suggested that something in the larger operation was not proceeding as planned, and she watched him gesture sharply to 2 of his men, who immediately moved toward positions that would give them better control over the hostages. This was the moment when Sarah realized that the situation was about to escalate in ways that would put innocent lives at immediate risk. Her years of studying criminal psychology and hostage situations had taught her to recognize the warning signs that indicated when desperate criminals might begin using violence to regain control of situations that were slipping away from them. The decision that had been building in Sarah's mind for the past 4 minutes crystallized into absolute clarity. She possessed capabilities that no one else in the coffee shop could match, and circumstances had developed in ways that made intervention not just possible, but necessary. The promise she had made to her father 12 years earlier was about to be tested in the most literal and immediate way possible. Sarah began her preparation with breathing techniques that her father had taught her to use before engaging targets at extreme distances. The tactical breathing served a dual purpose: it calmed her nervous system while simultaneously increasing her oxygen intake in ways that would enhance her physical performance during the demanding actions that lay ahead. Her purse, which sat innocuously on the table beside her coffee cup, contained items that would seem completely ordinary to any observer but that Sarah had specifically chosen for their potential tactical utility. The metal pen could serve as a striking weapon, the compact mirror could be used for surveillance around corners, and even her keys were arranged in a configuration that could be weaponized if necessary. But Sarah's most significant advantage was not any physical tool she carried, it was the 12 years of mental conditioning that allowed her to remain calm and analytical in circumstances that reduced other people to panic and confusion. While the other hostages struggled with fear and uncertainty, Sarah was calculating distances, evaluating angles, and planning sequences of actions that would neutralize threats with minimal risk to innocent bystanders. The transformation that occurred within Sarah during those preparation moments would have astounded anyone who thought they knew her. The quiet accountant who worried about quarterly reports and always paid with exact change was accessing a part of her personality that had been forged in countless hours of demanding training designed to prepare her for exactly these circumstances. Miguel Martinez had built his daughter into a weapon, but, more importantly, he had instilled in her the judgment and restraint necessary to use that weapon only when absolutely necessary. Sarah understood that once she acted, there would be no return to the quiet life she had carefully constructed. Everything would change in ways that she could not fully anticipate or control. At minute 6, Kozlov's radio crackled with what sounded like urgent communications from his teams at other locations. Sarah could not make out the specific words, but his reaction suggested that the larger operation was encountering unexpected complications that were forcing changes to their timeline and procedures. The stress of command was beginning to show in Kozlov's behavior. He snapped orders at his men with increasing harshness and began pacing in patterns that brought him closer to the hostages than his original positioning had required. Sarah recognized these as signs that the situation was destabilizing in ways that increased the probability of violence. When Kozlov grabbed Margaret Chen by the arm and began shouting at her about something she could not possibly understand, Sarah knew that the moment for action had arrived. The elderly woman's obvious terror and confusion had made her a target for frustrations that had nothing to do with her, and Sarah could not allow innocent people to suffer violence while she possessed the ability to prevent it. The decision to act required Sarah to abandon 12 years of careful anonymity and accept that her life was about to change in fundamental ways. But the alternative was to watch helpless people suffer and die while she sat motionless, knowing that her unique capabilities might have made the difference between tragedy and survival. As Sarah prepared to stand up from her table and begin the most challenging 12 minutes of her life, she felt her father's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. Miguel Martinez had trained her for this moment, had prepared her to make this choice, and had given her the skills necessary to succeed in circumstances that would challenge the most experienced professionals. The transformation from Sarah Martinez, accountant, to Sarah Martinez, protector, happened in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Everything her father had taught her about courage, preparation, and the responsibility that came with extraordinary capabilities was about to be tested in ways that would determine whether his years of dedication had created someone capable of making a difference when differences mattered most. The next 6 minutes would prove whether 12 years of secret preparation had been sufficient to handle 8 dangerous men who threatened innocent lives. Sarah stood up from her table, and her carefully hidden life as one of the country's most capable defensive shooters was about to become devastatingly visible to everyone present. Sarah's first movement was so subtle that none of the 8 gunmen registered it as a threat. She simply stood up from her table, appearing to be another terrified customer attempting to comply with shouted orders to move away from the windows. But, in that seemingly innocent action, she had positioned herself with tactical precision that gave her optimal angles to engage multiple targets while minimizing exposure to return fire. The transformation that occurred within Sarah as she rose from her chair would have amazed combat psychologists who studied human performance under extreme stress. Years of conditioning allowed her to access a state of consciousness that combined hyper-aware analysis with absolute physical control. Time seemed to slow as her perception shifted into the heightened state that her father had called the zone, where thought and action merged into seamless execution. Vincent Kozlov was still gripping Margaret Chen's arm when Sarah moved with explosive speed that defied the gentle accountant persona she had maintained for over a decade. Her first action was to disarm the nearest gunman, Marcus Webb, who had positioned himself within arm's reach while monitoring the customers near the window tables. The technique Sarah employed was a close-quarters disarmament that combined elements from multiple martial arts disciplines, modified by Miguel's military experience to be devastatingly effective against armed opponents. Webb's assault rifle was torn from his grip before he could process what was happening, and Sarah's follow-up strike ensured he would not be participating in any further hostile activities. The entire sequence from Sarah's initial movement to Webb's neutralization took less than 3 seconds, but it had the effect of completely disrupting Kozlov's operational control. The sudden appearance of organized resistance from what had appeared to be a harmless civilian forced him to redirect his attention away from terrorizing Margaret Chen and toward dealing with an unexpected tactical problem. Sarah's acquisition of Webb's assault rifle changed the entire dynamic of the situation. In her hands, the weapon became something far more dangerous to the criminals than it had been in Webb's possession. 12 years of training with similar weapons had given her an intimate understanding of their capabilities and limitations that exceeded what most military personnel ever achieved. Kozlov's reaction time was actually impressive for someone facing an unexpected development of this magnitude. He released Margaret Chen and began to turn toward Sarah while simultaneously reaching for his radio to alert his other teams that the operation had been compromised. But his movements, though quick, were not quick enough to match someone who had spent years training for exactly this type of scenario. Sarah's second engagement targeted Antonio Silva, who had been positioned near the coffee shop's rear exit to prevent customer escapes. Silva's location made him a priority target because his position would allow him to threaten fleeing hostages once the shooting started. The range was approximately 25 yards through a space filled with tables, chairs, and terrified people who had dropped to the floor when the violence began. The shot that neutralized Silva would have impressed competitive marksmen who practiced in controlled environments without the stress of life-or-death circumstances. Sarah's bullet placement was so precise that Silva was eliminated as a threat without any risk to the customers who had been near his position. The round struck exactly where she had intended, demonstrating the kind of accuracy that required both exceptional skill and absolute confidence in that skill. Raymond Park, positioned near the front entrance, was Sarah's third target. His role in the criminal operation had been to monitor street activity and prevent law enforcement from approaching the coffee shop undetected. But his position also made him a threat to customers who might attempt to escape through the main entrance once they realized that effective resistance had emerged. The angle required to engage Park demanded that Sarah move from her initial position near the window to a location that would give her a clear field of fire without exposing innocent customers to potential return fire. This tactical movement demonstrated the three-dimensional thinking that separated amateur shooters from professionals who understood how to use space and positioning as weapons. Park's neutralization was accomplished with the same devastating precision that had characterized Sarah's previous engagements. But, by this point, the remaining gunmen had begun to understand that they were facing opposition that far exceeded their planning and experience. The quiet coffee shop had transformed into a battlefield where their numerical advantage was being systematically eliminated by someone whose capabilities they could not have anticipated. Kozlov's attempts to maintain command control were hampered by the rapid pace at which his team was being neutralized and the shocking realization that their supposedly helpless hostages had included someone with military-grade combat skills. His radio communications with external teams became increasingly frantic as he tried to explain a situation that defied his previous criminal experience. The fourth and fifth neutralizations happened in rapid succession as Sarah moved through the coffee shop with fluid efficiency that made her appear to be dancing rather than fighting. Years of training had taught her to use momentum and positioning to maintain continuous advantage over opponents who were struggling to adapt to circumstances they had never encountered. David Rodriguez, the graphic designer, later told investigators that watching Sarah work was like observing a lethal ballet performed by someone who understood violence as an art form. Her movements were economical and precise, with no wasted motion or unnecessary flourish. Each action served a specific tactical purpose that advanced her toward the objective of protecting innocent people from immediate danger. Emily Thompson, still clutching her 2-year-old son, found herself in the surreal position of being protected by someone who had seemed indistinguishable from any other customer just minutes earlier. The disconnect between Sarah's ordinary appearance and her extraordinary capabilities would have been impossible to believe if Emily had not witnessed it directly. The sixth neutralization presented Sarah's most challenging tactical problem because the remaining gunman had positioned himself in a location that used Margaret Chen as inadvertent cover. The angle and distance required a shot that would eliminate the threat while ensuring absolutely no harm to the elderly woman who had become an unwitting shield. Sarah's solution demonstrated why Miguel Martinez had spent years training his daughter to make shots that challenged the limits of human capability. The precision required exceeded what most professional snipers would attempt in optimal conditions, but Sarah executed it in a coffee shop filled with obstacles and distractions while under the stress of active combat. By this point, Kozlov had realized that his operation was beyond salvage and that his primary objective had shifted from criminal profit to personal survival. His remaining team members were either neutralized or in the process of being neutralized by someone whose identity and capabilities remained completely unknown to him. The seventh neutralization occurred as Kozlov attempted to use innocent customers as human shields while maneuvering toward what he hoped might be an escape route. But Sarah's positioning and tactical awareness allowed her to anticipate his movements and cut off his options before he could implement desperate measures that would have put additional lives at risk. With only Kozlov himself remaining as an active threat, Sarah found herself in the position of having successfully protected every innocent person in the coffee shop while systematically defeating a coordinated criminal operation that had been planned and executed by experienced professionals. The final engagement between Sarah and Kozlov took place in the center of the coffee shop, surrounded by evidence of what 12 minutes of perfect precision could accomplish when extraordinary skills met extraordinary circumstances. Sarah had honored her father's memory and justified 12 years of secret preparation by proving that sometimes ordinary people possess extraordinary capabilities that emerge only when ordinary people need extraordinary protection. As sirens wailed in the distance and police units responded to reports of gunfire at Brewster's Coffee House, Sarah stood amid the results of her intervention, knowing that her quiet life as an anonymous accountant had ended permanently. But 35 innocent people were alive and unharmed, and that outcome had made every sacrifice worthwhile. The silence that followed Vincent Kozlov's neutralization was unlike anything the customers of Brewster's Coffee House had ever experienced. It was the profound quiet that comes after violence has ended but before normal life can resume, a moment suspended between crisis and recovery where people struggle to process events that exceed their previous experience of reality. Sarah stood in the center of the coffee shop, still holding Marcus Webb's assault rifle, surrounded by evidence of what 12 minutes could accomplish when years of preparation met desperate necessity. Her floral dress remained incongruously cheerful amid the chaos, creating a visual disconnect that would haunt the memories of everyone who witnessed her transformation from quiet accountant to lethal protector. The first sounds to break the silence were not sirens or shouting, but the soft crying of Emily Thompson's 2-year-old son, Marcus, who had remained remarkably quiet throughout the ordeal but was now responding to the tension and fear that radiated from every adult in the room. Emily's attempts to comfort her child provided a human anchor that helped everyone begin the difficult transition from survival mode back to something resembling normal awareness. Margaret Chen, the elderly retired teacher who had been Kozlov's target when Sarah first acted, was staring at her protector with an expression that combined gratitude, amazement, and complete bewilderment. In her 73 years, she had never imagined that protection could come from someone who looked so ordinary and unassuming, and she was struggling to reconcile what she had witnessed with everything she thought she knew about the world. David Rodriguez, the graphic designer, had his laptop bag clutched against his chest like a shield, even though the danger had passed. His artistic mind was already trying to process what he had seen in terms of movement, color, and form, but the violence was too raw and immediate for aesthetic interpretation. He would later describe the experience as watching someone paint with lethal precision on a canvas of life and death. The first police officers to arrive at Brewster's Coffee House encountered a scene that challenged their training and experience in ways they had never anticipated. They expected to find either an active shooting situation or the aftermath of criminal violence, but instead discovered a coffee shop full of traumatized but unharmed civilians and one woman in a floral dress who had somehow single-handedly neutralized 8 armed criminals. Detective Linda Morrison, a 20-year veteran of the force, later said that walking into Brewster's that morning was like entering a crime scene where the laws of probability had been temporarily suspended. The tactical precision evident in how the criminals had been neutralized suggested military or law enforcement training, but the person responsible was a 28-year-old accountant with no apparent connection to either profession. Sarah's cooperation with law enforcement was complete and immediate, but her explanations created more questions than they answered. She provided accurate and detailed information about the sequence of events, demonstrated comprehensive knowledge of the weapons involved, and showed a level of tactical awareness that amazed investigators who specialized in violent crime. The background check that followed revealed the carefully constructed normalcy of Sarah's adult life, but also raised puzzling questions about how someone with her unremarkable history had acquired capabilities that impressed seasoned professionals. Her father's military service provided some context, but the extent and sophistication of her skills suggested training that went far beyond what a veteran could have provided to his teenage daughter. FBI involvement became inevitable when investigators realized that the criminals Sarah had neutralized were part of a larger operation that had targeted multiple locations across the city. The coordination and planning evident in their activities suggested organized crime connections that elevated the case beyond local jurisdiction and into federal territory. Special Agent Rebecca Collins, who headed the federal investigation, found herself dealing with a situation that defied the usual categories of criminal justice. Sarah had unquestionably saved multiple lives and prevented significant criminal activity, but her methods and capabilities raised questions about vigilantism and the legal implications of civilian intervention in criminal operations. The media attention that followed was both inevitable and overwhelming. Sarah's transformation from anonymous accountant to local hero created a story that captured public imagination in ways that surprised everyone involved. News outlets struggled to explain how someone could possess such extraordinary capabilities while living such an ordinary life, leading to speculation that ranged from government conspiracy theories to claims about secret military programs. Sarah's neighbors in the quiet subdivision of Maple Grove found themselves thrust into the spotlight as reporters sought to understand how they could have lived next to someone with such remarkable abilities without ever suspecting anything unusual. The revelation that their quiet, friendly neighbor had been maintaining an underground training facility shocked residents who thought they knew their community. Tom Brewster, the coffee shop owner, faced the complex task of rebuilding his business after events that had transformed his peaceful establishment into the site of a nationally famous incident. While he was grateful that Sarah had prevented a tragedy, he also struggled with the knowledge that his morning routine had nearly cost 35 people their lives and had been saved only by the presence of someone whose identity remained largely mysterious. The psychological impact on the other customers who had been present during the incident varied dramatically based on their personalities and previous life experiences. Some, like Margaret Chen, found themselves feeling safer knowing that protective capabilities could exist in unexpected places. Others, like David Rodriguez, struggled with anxiety about violence that could emerge without warning in previously safe environments. Emily Thompson's reaction was perhaps the most complex of all. As a mother who had witnessed her child's life being protected by someone she had never noticed before that morning, she felt profound gratitude combined with unsettling questions about what other secrets might be hidden behind the ordinary appearances of everyday people. The legal proceedings that followed were precedent-setting in their complexity. Sarah's actions were clearly justified under self-defense and defense of others statutes, but the extent of her capabilities and the thoroughness of her response raised questions about proportional force and civilian intervention that legal scholars would debate for years. Sarah's decision about how to continue her life after the incident required her to choose between attempting to return to anonymity and accepting the reality that her secret capabilities had become public knowledge. The basement training facility that had been her sanctuary for 12 years was now evidence in a federal investigation, and her quiet accounting career had ended the moment she stood up from her coffee shop table. The job offers that followed came from federal agencies, private security firms, and military contractors who recognized her unique combination of skills and judgment. But Sarah found herself reluctant to embrace a career built around the violence that she had hoped never to use, preferring instead to find ways to honor her father's memory while building a life that emphasized protection rather than destruction. The community impact of the incident extended far beyond those directly involved. Discussions about hidden capabilities, civilian preparedness, and the nature of heroism became part of local conversations that would influence how people thought about safety, community, and the potential for ordinary individuals to make extraordinary differences. Sarah's story became a case study in military and law enforcement academies, where instructors used her tactical decisions to illustrate principles of precision, restraint, and effective intervention. But, more importantly, her story became an inspiration for people who wondered whether they possessed capabilities they had never been forced to discover. The coffee shop where 35 people had their lives saved by someone they never suspected reopened 6 weeks after the incident, with a small plaque near Sarah's usual table that read simply, "Sometimes heroes hide in plain sight." The inscription captured something profound about the nature of capability, preparation, and the responsibility that comes with extraordinary skills held by ordinary people. As Sarah looked toward a future that would be fundamentally different from anything she had previously imagined, she carried with her the knowledge that 12 years of secret preparation had proven sufficient for 12 minutes that mattered more than all the quiet years that preceded them. Her father's training had prepared her not just to protect innocent people, but to make choices that honored the best aspects of human capability when those capabilities were needed most. The woman who had walked into Brewster's coffee house as an anonymous accountant had emerged as living proof that heroism can exist in the most unexpected places, waiting for the moment when preparation meets necessity and ordinary people discover they possess the power to accomplish extraordinary things.